The capture of New Orleans during the American Civil War was an important event for the Union. Having fought past Forts Jackson and St. Philip, the Union was unopposed in its capture of the city itself, which was spared the destruction suffered by many other southern cities. However, the controversial and confrontational administration of the city by its U.S. Army military governor caused lasting resentment. This capture of the largest Confederate city was a major turning point and an incident of international importance. Background: the history of New Orleans contrasts significantly with the histories of other cities that became part of the Confederate States of America. Because it was founded by the French and owned by Spain for a time, New Orleans had a more cosmopolitan culture and diverse population. Only 13% of the 1810 population was Anglo-American. The census population of that time was made up of mostly French-speaking refugees from the Haitian Revolution, the French and Indian War, and French and Spanish Creoles along with some smuggled slaves. New Orleans also benefited more by the Industrial Revolution, international trade, and geographical position. Its position by the mouth of the Mississippi River, which drained most of the North American continent, made New Orleans one of the most significant transportation centers in the early United States before the establishment of railroad and road systems. Of particular significance were the inventions of the steamboat and the cotton gin. Before the steamboat, keelboatmen bringing cargo downriver would break up their boats for lumber in New Orleans and travel overland back to Ohio or Illinois to repeat the process. Steamboats had enough power to move upstream against the current of the Mississippi, making two-way trade possible between New Orleans and the cities in the interior river network. With the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, which greatly expanded international trade, and the development of the cotton gin, cotton became a valuable export product, adding to the volume of cargo moved through the city. Jacksonian Democracy and Manifest Destiny. A formative event in the early history of New Orleans was the Battle of New Orleans. This battle, though fought after the end of the War of 1812, enhanced the political career of Andrew Jackson, who, along with Martin Van Buren, in turn founded the Democratic Party. Jackson became the first of America's imperial presidents, and began a new political movement now known as the Jacksonian Democracy. This new direction in American politics had a profound influence on the development of New Orleans in the American Southwest. One of these developments was the construction of Fort Jackson, Louisiana, a star fort suggested by and named after Jackson. This fortress was intended to support Fort St. Philip and bar the Mississippi Delta from invasion. The presidents of the Jacksonian Democracy supported the concept of Manifest Destiny, greatly expanding acquisition of territory in the American Southwest and the support of international trade along with the spread of slavery. This powerful political movement also produced sectional tension between the northern and southern halves of the United States, resulting in the creation of the Whig Party to oppose the new Democratic Party. As the political rivalry between the Jacksonian Democrats and the Whigs intensified, the Republican Party was founded to counter the spread of slavery into states produced by territorial conquest of the Jacksonian Democrats. The victory of Abraham Lincoln, the Republican presidential candidate, in the election of 1860, resulted in the secession crisis and the American Civil War. The duel in the mouth of the Mississippi. By the year 1860, the city of New Orleans was in a position of unprecedented economic, military, and political power. The Mexican-American War, along with the annexation of Texas, had made New Orleans even more of a springboard for expansion. The California Gold Rush contributed another share to local wealth. The electrical telegraph arrived in New Orleans in 1848, and the completion of the New Orleans, Jackson, and Great Northern Railroad from New Orleans to Canton, a distance of over 200 miles, added another dimension to local transportation. The combination of all these factors resulted in an increase in the price of prime field hands of 21% in 1848. And further increases as the value of trade grew through the 1850s. By 1860, New Orleans was one of the greatest ports in the world, with 33 different steamship lines and trade worth $500 million passing through the city. As far as population, the city not only outnumbered any other city in the South, it was larger than the four next largest southern cities combined, with an estimated population of 168,675. War and battle. The election of Lincoln in 1860 inspired one of the most ardent secessionists in Louisiana, its governor, Thomas Overton Moore, who had taken office on January 23, 1860. Governor Moore interdicted an effort to make New Orleans a free city, or neutral area in the conflict. A solid Democrat, Moore organized an effective and discreet movement that voted Louisiana out of the Union in a secession convention that represented only 5% of the citizens of Louisiana. Moore also ordered the Louisiana militia to seize the federal arsenal at Baton Rouge, and the federal forts. These military moves were ordered on January 8, 1861, before the secession convention. With military companies forming all over Louisiana, the convention itself was anticlimactic, voting Louisiana out of the Union 113-17. The outbreak of hostilities in the area of Fort Sumter, South Carolina, led to the story of New Orleans in the Civil War. The Union's strategy was devised by Winfield Scott, whose Anaconda Plan called for the division of the Confederacy by seizing control of the Mississippi River. One of the first steps in such operations was the imposition of the Union Blockade. After the blockade was established, a Confederate naval counterattack attempted to drive off the Union Navy, resulting in the Battle of the Head of Passes. The Union countermove was to enter the mouth of the Mississippi River, ascend to New Orleans and capture the city, closing off the mouth of the Mississippi to Confederate shipping both from the Gulf and from Mississippi River ports still used by Confederate vessels. In mid-January 1862, Flag Officer David G. Farragut had undertaken this enterprise with his West Gulf blockading squadron. The way was soon open except the water passage past the two masonry forts held by Confederate artillery, Fort Jackson and Fort St. Philip, which were above the head of passes approximately 70 miles downriver below New Orleans. From April 18 to April 28, Farragut bombarded and then fought his way past these forts in the Battle of Forts Jackson and St. Philip, managing to get 13 of his fleet's ships upriver on April 24. Historian John D. Winters in the Civil War in Louisiana noted that with few exceptions the Confederate fleet at New Orleans had made a sorry showing. Self-destruction, lack of cooperation, cowardice of untrained officers, and the murderous fire of the Federal gunboats reduced the fleet to a demoralized shambles. The enemy at the dock, Major General Mansfield Lovell, commander of Department 1, Louisiana, was left with one tenable option after the Union Navy broke through the Confederate ring of fortifications and defense vessels guarding the lower Mississippi. Evacuation. The inner ring of fortifications at Chalmette was only intended to resist ground troops. Few of the gun batteries were aimed toward the river. Most of the artillery, ammunition, troops, and vessels in the area were committed to the Jackson St. Philip's position. Once this defense was breached, there remained to face Union troops and warships only 3,000 militiamen with sundry military supplies and armed with shotguns. The city itself was a poor position to defend against a hostile fleet. With high water outside the levees, Union ships were elevated above the city and able to fire down into the streets and buildings below. Besides the ever-present danger of weather-caused breaks in the levees, now an even greater threat to New Orleans was the ability of the Union military to cause a break in a major levee that would lead to flooding most of the city, possibly destroying it within a day. Lovell loaded his troops and supplies aboard the New Orleans, Jackson and Great Northern Railroad and sent him to Camp Moore, 78 miles north. All artillery and munitions were sent to Vicksburg. Lovell then sent a last message to the War Department in Richmond: "The enemy has passed the forts. It is too late to send any guns here. They had better go to Vicksburg." Military stores, ships, and warehouses were then burned. Anything considered useful to the Union, including thousands of bales of cotton, were thrown into the river. Despite the complete vulnerability of the city, the citizens along with military and civil authorities remained defiant. At 2 p.m. on April 25, Admiral Farragut sent Captain Bailey, 1st Division commander from the Cayuga, to accept the surrender of the city. Armed mobs within the city defied the Union officers and Marines sent to City Hall. General Lovell and Mayor Monroe refused to surrender the city. William B. Mumford pulled down a Union flag raised over the former U.S. Mint by Marines of the Pensacola, and the mob destroyed it. Farragut did not destroy the city in response, but moved upriver to subdue fortifications north of the city. On April 29, Farragut and 250 Marines from the Hartford removed the Louisiana state flag from the City Hall. By May 2, U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward declared New Orleans recovered, and mails are allowed to pass.